Space is a place for dead things. It is a void, ancient and silent, where the heat of creation has long since cooled, and the whispers of life are crushed beneath an eternity of darkness. The stars that pierce its ink-black skin are cold, indifferent eyes, their light a distant echo of lives burned out millions of years before human tongues first dared to name them. The void is no place for human beings, and yet humans have come here, wrapping themselves in fragile bubbles of steel and glass, huddled against the cold with their machinery and thin, artificial air. They cling to their routines, their blinking monitors and sterile rituals, hoping the hum of electric life will drown out the oppressive silence. But the void is patient. It has seen empires rise and fall, stars born and die, galaxies collide and crumble into dust. Inside the orbital station, Astrion, Leah floated weightlessly. She paused mid-task, her fingers hovering over a touchpad as the faintest whisper curled around her mind like a cold breath against the back of her neck. She turned, eyes narrowed, but found only the empty hallway behind her, humming faintly with the station's life support. She shook her head, a bitter smile twisting her lips. Just her imagination, she thought. Just the mind playing tricks in the deep, lonely dark. But the whisper lingered in the back of her mind, like something waiting for her to notice. Something terribly, terribly patient. Leah settled into the cramped command module, the dim lights casting long shadows across the polished steel panels. She flexed her fingers and blinked at the rows of data streaming across her tablet. Numbers and pressure readouts, oxygen levels and radiation counts, the delicate balance of survival in the harshest of environments. For a moment her mind drifted, the symbols on the screen blurring into meaningless, shifting shapes. She shook her head, forcing her focus back to the task at hand. She pressed a few keys, watching the system diagnostics scroll by. The soft beeping of life support, the only sound in the empty cabin. Then faint and ghostly came a whisper. It was so soft, so subtle, that at first she thought it was just the low hum of the station's ventilation. But as she adjusted her position, leaning closer to the console, it came again, a faint, breathy murmur, like the distant echo of someone speaking through layers of static. Leah. She froze, her pulse quickening, eyes darting to the small observation port beside her. The dark, endless void stared back, the curve of Earth a ghostly blue against the abyss. She tapped her headset, checking the comms. The line to mission control was silent, a thin green line on the monitor confirming the closed channel. She forced a shaky laugh. Isolation, she thought. Fatigue, common in prolonged missions. She'd read the psychological reports, the tales of astronauts hallucinating shadows where there were none, hearing voices in the mechanical clank and hiss of their fragile metal homes. Just stress, she whispered, rubbing her eyes. Your mind is playing tricks. But the whisper lingered, curling around her thoughts like a thin, icy fog. She tried to ignore it, turning back to her data readouts. But the numbers seemed to flicker in the corner of her vision, shifting and writhing like something alive. Somewhere behind her, in the deep shadows of the empty module, a faint metallic creak echoed through the cabin, followed by another whisper, this time clearer, closer. It's time. Leah's breath caught, her fingers gripping the edge of the console, knuckles white. She turned slowly, eyes wide, heart thundering in her chest. The hallway behind her was empty, the faint lights flickering as the station drifted through another shadowed arc of its orbit. She exhaled, forcing a smile, bringing her focus back to the screen, her hands trembling slightly. The voice whispered again, soft, insistent, and now undeniably real. "Open the way." Harold floated into the small galley, his muscles stiff from another fitful sleep. He reached for a vacuum-sealed packet of rehydrated goo from the dispenser. He took a long, flavorless sip, feeling the thick, lukewarm paste slide down his throat. As he drifted back, his free hand instinctively catching the nearby handrail, he heard her. Leah was already there, curled in the corner near the observation port, her knees drawn up to her chest, eyes unfocused as she murmured to herself. Harold paused, the straw still between his teeth. She hadn't noticed him enter, her gaze fixed on the slow, endless spin of Earth outside the thick glass. Her lips moved rapidly, her voice a low, strained whisper, her fingers flexing in slow, unnatural rhythms against her knees. "Of course, I want to meet you. But what about Harold? What if he—" No, I understand." Harold's stomach tightened. He drifted closer, careful to move slowly, his motions silent in the thin recycled air. "Leah," he said, trying to keep his tone light, though a cold dread was already creeping up his spine. She stiffened, her head snapping around, eyes wide and unblinking, the deep shadows under her eyes making her gaunt face look almost skeletal. For a moment she didn't seem to recognize him. Then slowly, a tight, strained smile cracked her dry lips. "Oh, Harold," she said, her voice too bright, too forced. "I didn't hear you come in." He drifted a little closer. "You all right?" You were talking to yourself." Her eyes flicked back to the window, the dark void beyond. She forced a short, brittle laugh. "Oh, that," she said, brushing a trembling hand through her unwashed hair. Just running through some system checks in my head. You know how it is. Cabin fever." Harold hesitated, his pulse pounding in his chest. "Yeah," he said slowly. "Yeah, I know how it is." But as he turned back toward the control module, he felt her eyes still on him, sharp and watchful, her lips moving again in that rapid, whispered conversation with the empty air. "It's just that you sound like you're talking to someone that's not here," he said as he turned back to her. "I could call down to base and see if..." Leah lashed out at him, yelling, "No!" sending him tumbling into the wall behind him, head glancing off a metal handrail. A single red glob floated into view. Harold reached up, and his fingers came away, bloody. Leah's demeanor changed instantly. Apologetically, she reached for him. "Oh, my God. I'm so sorry, Harold. Let me clean that up." Harold held his other hand up. "Back off. I'll do it myself." He pulled himself through the door one-handed and went to find a med kit. Leah just sat there, concern on her face, but not for Harold. "Yes, my lord, he can't call them." Harold strapped into his sleep pod later that night. His head hurt still, but the cut was small. He was exhausted from the strangeness of the day. Calling in Leah's condition seemed like the best course of action. He decided to give her one last chance in the morning to get a grip before he contacted Mission Control. He was almost afraid to let his guard down, but sleep overtook him. He woke to the faint rasping sound of Leah's voice, a rapid, whispered stream of half-formed words, muffled by the layers of metal and insulation, but still unmistakable. "No, no, he mustn't do that. Yes, I understand. My lord." Harold felt a cold sweat break out along his spine. He forced himself to breathe, to slow his racing pulse, but the fear clung to him, thick and suffocating. Then, slowly, he heard her shift, the faint rustle of fabric, the creak of her bony joints. She was close. Before he could react, she was looming over him in the dark, shoving a pillow down over his face with unnatural strength. He struggled in panic to grab her wrists and pry the pillow away from his face. He felt the thin, fragile bones of her wrists grinding beneath his fingers, the dry, papery skin of her hands rasping against his flesh. He gasped for air as he pulled his face free. Leah shrieked, and letting go of the pillow, she clawed at his face. "You can't stop me, Harold. I will open the way for my lord." With that, she kicked off the wall and darted out of the living quarters. Harold floated in the dark, his pulse still racing, his breath coming in short, ragged bursts. His hands trembled where they gripped the thin fabric straps of his sleep pod, his fingers aching, his head throbbing where Leia's nails had torn long, bloody gouges into his cheeks, his heart thundering against his ribs, his mind screaming with a single, desperate thought. "She's trying to kill me." The realization hit him like a physical blow. Leah had always been a friend, a crewmate, a confidant, a trusted voice in the darkness. They had shared long, sleepless nights in cramped capsules, whispered secrets over the soft hum of life support, laughed about the absurdity of life in the void. But now, she was a stranger, a ghost, a twisted skeletal shadow that drifted silently through the darkness, her wide, glassy eyes fixed on him, her thin, bloodless lips still moving in that endless whispered litany. He had to stop her. He forced his fingers to unclench, the thin straps creaking under the pressure, his pulse racing, his mind spinning with 1,000 desperate, terrified thoughts. He had to get to the control module, to lock her out, to seal himself behind the thick reinforced bulkheads, to call for help before she killed them both. He drifted through the darkness, his body twisting, his fingers brushing against the cold, smooth surfaces of the station's metal walls. His breath coming in short, frantic gasps. He felt his blood trickling slowly from the deep gouges in his cheeks, the dark droplets clinging to the cold, motionless air like tiny red planets caught in orbit. He rounded a corner and saw her. She was floating at the far end of the narrow corridor, her thin, skeletal form silhouetted against the faint greenish glow of the emergency lights. Her head tilted at that unnatural listening angle, lips still moving, fingers twitching like the legs of a dying insect. "Harold," she whispered, her voice thin, breathy, tinged with a strange, manic glee. "I know what I have to do now. I know what my lord wants." Harold felt his blood turn to ice. He forced himself to breathe, his mind spinning with 1,000 desperate, terrified thoughts. "Leah," he croaked, his voice thin, hoarse, his breath coming in short, frantic gulps. "Please, please don't do this. We can fix this. We can call ground control. We can get help. Just stop, please." "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice growing louder, more frantic, her eyes narrowing, teeth bared in a tight feral grin. "I'm his chosen one. I'm his vessel. I have to do this." Harold realized what panel she was rapidly pressing buttons on. The airlock. She can't possibly, but of course she could. He lunged as she hit the large button to cycle the inner door. Red spinning lights lit up in a frantic strobe of color. As he drew near her, she spun, ready for him. She struck him with a fire extinguisher square in the gut. The breath forced from his lungs, he doubled over, and Leah pushed quickly into the airlock chamber. "I'm his chosen one. I'm his vessel. I have to do this," she screamed. He heard a metallic clanging as she wedged the extinguisher into the door's hinges. Her hand slammed into the button to activate the outer door. Sirens wailed, and a voice announced that the airlock was not properly sealed. Harold reoriented himself and looked up to see Leah typing away at an access panel inside the chamber. "No," he screamed, his voice hoarse, his breath coming in short, desperate gulps. "Leah, stop, please." She paused, her fingers hovering over the final button. Head tilting to one side, her eyes narrowing, lips curling into a small, tight grin. "I'm going to meet him," she whispered, her voice thin, breathy, tinged with a strange, manic glee. "I'm his chosen one." Before he could reach her, she hit enter. Manual override accepted. Her thin, bony fingers twisting the final red handle. No, Leah, please, don't do this." The airlock hissed, the thick, cold metal vibrating, the air rushing past her face. Her lips still moving, her eyes still fixed on his. And then she was gone, sucked into the void, twisting, spinning, tumbling into the endless, indifferent dark. Harold was sucked to the airlock's threshold, his fingers clawing at the cold, unyielding metal, his heart thundering against his ribs. The rush of escaping air pulled the blood from his wounds in long, spiraling tendrils that twisted and coiled through the darkened cabin like the roots of a dying tree. His vision swam, his mind spinning, body trembling with a cold, paralyzing fear. He had to shut the inner door. He reached inside to try and dislodge the fire extinguisher, his fingers growing numb as they clawed in vain. As the last shreds of air escaped the cabin, he heard it, faint, distant, a deep, rumbling voice that vibrated through the thin, frigid air, shaking the metal walls of the station, echoing through the darkened corridors, filling his head with a single, terrible thought. "Pathetic little humans." The voice rumbled, deep and cruel, its tone tinged with a dark, mocking amusement, its words vibrating through his bones, his flesh, his brain. "So small, so fragile, so eager to serve." His mind fracturing, his thoughts splintering into 1,000 tiny broken pieces. "You came to my domain. You sought the stars. You reached for the void." His body went still. "And now your world will